Hello, my name is Daniel, and today I'm going to be talking about the American Temperance Movement. First, we're going to talk a little about the history of the movement and why it arose, and then we're going to talk a little about some of the organizations and their individual agendas and motives for being part of the movement. The movement really got started in the middle of the 18th or the 19th century when people in America were drinking a lot. For perspective, the average person living in the United States, this average adult living in the United States today, drinks about 2.3 gallons of alcohol per year, which is some of the most in the world, but certainly nothing close to what people were drinking back then. In the 1850s, the average person, including children, were drinking about 7 gallons of whiskey a year, which averages out to about 6 to 7 glasses of whiskey per day. Also, coincidentally, had the highest rates of public intoxication in our nation's history, and also had the highest rates of domestic violence. And there are also children who are literally starving to death because their fathers were spending all of their money on alcohol instead of taking care of their families. So clearly they were addressing an issue that was real. But there have been a lot of attempts at a temperance movement before that never really gone off the ground. But now finally, because the problem had gotten so severe, they are making some progress. The first major organization that got started was called the Washingtonians, and they were a very loose-knit organization, no central authority or anything like that, and they were kind of a precursor to modern-day Alcoholics Anonymous. They met in small groups and just talked about how alcohol was ruining their lives and tried to hold each other accountable to prevent each other from drinking. And the other major movement, group at the time was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which is an organization of women who were originally founded around issues of public health and sanitation, but started to advocate for abstinence from drinking alcohol because it was such a major contributor to domestic violence and the impoverishment of families. But both these organizations faced a lot of pushback from churches up and down the coast who considered them to be heretical because they were either women who were having authority or were men who were meeting and self-developing outside of the church. So there's a lot of initial pushback for about 20 or so years, but then fast forward to the early 1900s, and the church has now become one of the major movers in the temperance movement, and they're advocating for total abstinence, and they're moralizing it and talking about it from the pulpit. And there are organizations built around helping people get over their drinking problems, but most of it's about calling people drunks. And they did this a lot to gain a lot of political power and influence over the general public. At the same time, you have people like Susan B. Anthony and Wayne Wheeler who are trying to accomplish other political ambitions. Wheeler, his own career, and Susan B. Anthony, obviously famously known for getting the women's suffrage passed, really sort of co-opted this initial temperance movement and did work towards it in order to eventually expand their own political base. And eventually they did pass prohibition in 1920, which led to one of the greatest disasters of policy in American history. So the movement was started off with these really pure motives, but eventually sort of got co-opted by people who were seeking power for good or ill, and that's where it ended up.